Oh yeah, so scoop it up. Watch Daddy, ready? Yeah. I want to scrape this dirt out of the way. Oh yeah. Oh. Get your back into it. Oh yeah. Oh. Here, get some of that. Get some. Yeah. That's right. You gotta learn how to use the goon spoon before I let you use the saw. Right? Gotta pay your dues. Might as well get it over with while you're young.
Yeah.
This is the first of many holes I'm gonna be asking you to dig. Oh, good times. Alright guys, so I'm prepping for my siding here. And I bent up some flashings to go along the bottom edge here. Now this isn't code. Code just says put your tar paper on there and throw your siding on. But when you're dealing with wood siding, you know, that might be okay if you're dealing with a hardy product or stucco, something like that.
Daddy.
You got your shovel, Carver? Good job. But in this case, I'm using board and batten siding, which means the end grain is going to be facing down, so there'll be an opportunity for what's called capillary action, which is when the water soaks up into the end grain of the wood, which I don't want because that keeps a moist bit of wood up against the house here. And the tar paper just finishes in the framing. Watch, step out of the way, guys. Daddy's making a video. Okay, come dig on the other side over here. Come dig in this pile right here. Get these big rocks out. So what I'm doing to prevent any kind of moisture from wicking up underneath the tar paper or just up the end of my siding is I'm putting in this big flashing here with it's got a 5-inch upstand on it. And then I'm going to run a big layer of band of blue skin peel and stick membrane that overlaps the tar paper onto the flashing, and then I'm going to put my wood siding on top of that, so that if there's any wood that's, you know, soaking up the end of the board in behind the board, that moisture is going to be against the blue skin membrane and not, you know, this ratty old tar paper. So it just makes sure that the framing for your building stays intact long term. Today's building codes are really only spec'd for buildings to last, you know, 50, 60 years. So they expect everybody to be tearing them down by then anyways. The trends are changing. It's just a bunch of consumer bull, in my opinion. So I'm building this so that these guys don't have to replace the siding when they're my age. Or even when they're 50, hopefully. And if they do end up having to replace the siding for whatever reason, when they take it off, the building's still going to be intact behind that siding. So it just cuts down on work for you guys, right? Daddy's looking out for you.
Daddy, over there.
What do you see? So the flashing overlaps. Like so. And then I'm going to put the blue skin over top of that, and then this, you can see the flashing start. Easy, buddy. Don't throw rocks on the flashing. And then I bent this flashing myself. You can order custom bent flashings. You know, if you live in a town that's big enough, there should be a sheet metal shop that does custom flashing. So you just think up whatever profile you want. They should be able to bend those up for you in any color, pretty cheap. I bent these myself, and it's got a 1-inch little flat section and then a 1/2-inch drip edge here. So any water that's going to come down the siding, right, it's going to drip underneath the bottom of the siding, hit this flashing. I'll leave a good gap of probably about 1 inch. Just going to hit the flashing right here, and then the water will move away from the building before it drips off the flashing onto, I'm going to be pouring a concrete little sidewalk along the building here. So that way all the water, by the time it exits the siding, will be away from the building, and then the sidewalk will be sloped away as well. So that water has no potential to be wicked back up into the framing of the building. Alright, so this is the fun part, putting on this blue ski and stuff. Tricky. I've snapped the line so I can follow that and make sure my blue skin stays level, doesn't drop down too low. Let's test. So a lot of you are probably like, oh, this is overkill. And you're right, it is. Everything I do is overkill. But you have to understand that this part of your siding sees the most weather out of anything, right? The driving rain hits the lower section of your siding the most, as well as all the rain that hits higher up travels over this section as it drains off the building. So there's the erosion and the UV damage, because when the water's on the siding and the sunlight hits it, the water acts as like a lens, which deteriorates the siding even more. That's why when you see a piece of wood out in the sun, like a raw piece of wood, you can see the section that has water on it, because it'll go gray 10 times faster than the other piece of wood, which will take years to actually turn gray. But if you run water over it constantly, it'll turn gray like in a few months. So that's just the damaging effects of water and sunlight mixed together. So yes, this is overkill, but it just allows me to sleep at night knowing that any water that tries to wick itself up and behind my siding is just going to hit this membrane, and it's not going to do any damage to the building or the subframing behind it. All right, guys, so don't be afraid to do a little extra work to increase the longevity of your building and your woodworking. Another few tips. If you are choosing to properly waterproof your window flanges, and you're putting some peel and stick on the side of your windows, keep your peel and stick a little bit ways, about a 3/16 to a 1/4 of an inch back from the inside corner of your window jamb there. That way when you put your trim on, if your trim has a little bit of a gap beside the window here, say your trim's green, you put it on tight and then it shrinks a little bit and there's a gap that forms, you don't want to see peel and stick kind of in that little crack, so just keep it back a little bit, because having a little stripe of blue sticking out is just not going to look good as you walk by. Another important thing to note, depending on how you're laying out your siding, whether you're doing horizontal siding or vertical board and batten siding like I'm doing, in this case there's a few situations where I want to know exactly where my board layout is. Hey, you. So what I've done is, when I look at the front of the barn, I want it to look proportionate. So I've dropped a center line from the peak of my gable down so I know exactly where my center is, and I'm going to lay out my first board dead on center. So that when you look up to the peak, you don't have a weird kind of offset angle or a joint that's a little bit off center, like where a batten is sitting. So I'll have a nice board directly on the center, and then I'll work my way to each side from center. That way I know my siding is going to look very balanced. And then I've also measured to certain areas from that center board. Another problem area is where I'm putting my trim on here. I'm going to have two pieces of trim close together. So I obviously don't want a batten or a joint in my siding somewhere in between this gap. I'd like to have one solid board that overlaps to the trim boards. And I measured off my center, and it just happens to work out perfectly that I've got a board there. If it wasn't going to work out perfectly with 10-inch boards, I would potentially think about ripping them down to say 9.5 or whatever, so that I would get a proper spacing. So it definitely doesn't hurt to take a little bit of time and just get a little anal retentive and lay everything out to make sure that you're not going to run into issues, right? Because if you just start at one corner of your building and work your way across, I guarantee you're going to run into some funky stuff and challenges when you're putting on your trim and your siding. And you might just have to deal with it, and you're not going to tear it all off, and then you look back at it and it just bugs you for the rest of your life every time you look at that one little section where the joint looks weird or whatever, right? So if you take the time on the layout, I assure you, you will be happy when everything is said and done. I got a bunch of boards oiled up and they're just drying. I'm going to start oiling some more boards. I just got to get everything really oiled up with one coat. I'm going to install all the wood, and then I'm going to put a second coat of oil on it in place. So stay tuned for the videos of the installation of the siding. Until next time, guys, Samurai out.